Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I am super excited today to be joined by my dear friends Shane, Kat, and Shannon, who will have introduced themselves in a sec here. Today, we're going to be talking about self-harm as part of our BPD symptom series, even though it's technically not its own symptom. It's usually paired with suicide, but self-harm and suicide are two very different things. So we wanted to separate them to really distinguish that conversation, and we will get into that in a sec. But maybe I'll start with introducing myself, and then we'll go to the others. So my name is Lori. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am joining from the unceded traditional territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations, which is also known as Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. Very, very happy to be here. It's a beautiful fall day, and I am a person who has borderline personality disorder and has lived with it for, well, arguably my whole life, but realistically have been diagnosed since I was 18. So that's, I'm not good at math, but let's say just under 15 years. That's not right. 12 years? I don't know. Something like that. I don't know how old I am. And have been doing dialectic behavior therapy since essentially that point of my life and use it all day, every day. And self-harm is something that I have struggled with in the past, so I'm excited to have this conversation. Maybe I'll go with Kat next.
Hey, I'm Kat. I am in and from Scotland. I've been diagnosed with PTSD for quite a while, and then CPTSD/EUPD for 5 years. Currently seeking DID diagnosis. Self-harm is something that has been part of my life for a very long time, so be a good chat.
So fun. Thanks, Kat. Shannon, how about you?
I'm Shannon. I live in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, Australia, on Wonnarua country, and my pronouns are she, hers. And self-harm is something that I have avoided. The impulses have been there, but so far it hasn't played a huge role in my life. So I'm interested in learning a bit more about it from you guys and how it affects you.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane. Let's see. I'm 28 years old. I got diagnosed with BPD when I was 24, 25. Before that, I had a diagnosis of bipolar and ADHD. Still have the ADHD diagnosis. But as far as self-harm goes, it's played a huge role in my life, and it's looked very different. So I'm really excited to have this conversation to really get into the nitty-gritty.
Woohoo! The funnest conversation. Thanks so much, Shane. Kat, did you give your pronouns?
They, them.
Okay. I was like, I maybe you did, but I forgot. I mean, I know your pronouns, but I forgot if you told
Yeah,
them.
cool. No, I didn't.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so self-harm. So a couple things to start off here in terms of the conversation. So as a general rule on this podcast, we don't talk about the details of self-harm. Just because there's no need to be triggering for no reason. We're not going to go into details. I guess, we didn't really talk about this before we started recording, but are you guys still okay with that kind of general rule for this topic, like not talking about methods, or do you think we should talk about methods?
I think you can talk about methods generally without detail, which might give context that would make stuff make more sense.
Okay, so like generally like cutting, burning, whatever, but not obviously over. Okay, cool. Shane, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Kat.
Okay, cool. And Shannon, I know this is not something that you experienced, so do you have?
I think whatever makes it probably more relatable to the listeners. So without obviously triggering someone or, giving ideas of, hey, this is how you do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that totally makes sense. So with that, I think be careful with listening to this episode, obviously. Take care of yourself, pause, turn it off, whatever, or don't listen to it at all. But this is something that up to 80% of people, I've also heard up to 90% of people with borderline personality disorder experience in some way is self-harm. So I think it's super important that we do talk about it and we don't hide this part of our lives. I also want to acknowledge a couple things. The first is that self-harm often in men is not necessarily looked at in the same way it is for women, which is super interesting. And I think has something to do with why the diagnostic criteria, like why women are diagnosed so much more, is because a lot of people hear self-harm and they think like cutting, burning, whatever. What they don't think is like reckless skateboarding, where you're breaking your bones all the time, or doing extreme sports that are really dangerous. And I do think that it's important to acknowledge that. We may or may not get into the details of we're not going to be able to identify all of the different ways you can self-harm, right? That's just like impossible because there's unlimited ways. But there are some that are more categorically or more considered like classic BPD experiences of self-harm, but those are also often quote unquote like classic women's experiences of self-harm. And so I think it's just important that we put that out there while we have this conversation. And then the other thing that I think is important to address is this concept of suicide, self-harm, and what's called non-suicidal self-injury, which is kind of the research modern way of talking about it, where in my head it's a bit of a spectrum, right? You've got suicide and suicide attempt on one side, and then you've got self-harm kind of in the middle that could go either way. And then on the other side you have non-suicidal self-injury, which is not with an intention to die. Just wanted to put that out there that we'll be talking more so about the self-harm and non-suicidal self-injury components of it, which some people think are the same thing. That will be an interesting debate for today's discussion. So with that, is there anybody that wants to start and talk about what self-harm looks like in their life or has looked like in their life?
That's an interesting question about suicide and self-injury and where it sits and stuff, because they're two very separate things for me. Yeah, if I think about it, I first self-harmed when I was about 6 or 7. And then that kind of evolved into something that I was doing multiple times a day, and it was that way for years. And it's something that is ever present now, in that I'll think about it daily, almost daily, if not daily. And it's very much, it's very related to anger for me. So like, it was never... There's a few times I can remember being absolutely furious with someone else and then just immediately self-harming. If I feel stupid or useless, anything like that, hopeless, trapped, then it'll be my first thought and has often been my first action.
Do you mind if I ask a question about... You said you started, you can not answer this question. You may not even know the answer to this question, but you said you started self-harming around 6 or 7. Do you remember how you even thought of that as an option? Was that something that you saw somebody else doing, or it just naturally occurred to you to do that?
It was because I was being bullied at school, and the first time I remember was we were outside doing PE, sort of sitting, waiting. We were like playing some sort of game where you took turns. And it was just something that happened.
And then you were like, oh, this is relieving or something? And then it kind of stuck? Interesting.
Yeah, not even really cognitively. It was just like, that started to be what I would do. And that would mostly be kind of... This is hard without talking about methods. Like, that would mostly be relatively tame.
You can talk about... I think it's okay that we talk about general methods.
Okay, so mostly it would be just like scratching with like stones or scissors, something like that. Which would... I wouldn't even take it that far until I was a teenager, and then that was when it did become cutting.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Before that, it was mostly scratching, like hitting and stuff. And
Scratching
then kind
is
of
honestly the worst afterwards when you shower, because the scratching ones, they take so long to heal because it's so painful afterwards. I don't know if anybody else experiences that, but for me, that's the most painful after effect is like scratching. Yeah. Anyways, maybe that's too much detail.
You can take that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No. I know, but I just for some reason anyways, I won't go too far.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah. We're like trying to speak in like code, but also not doing a very good job of it. Yeah. But I do, again, it's so hard, right? Because I don't want to censor conversations because it's important. So here we are. And you said that it's still a key component of your life. Is that something? So do you still engage in self-harm, or is it something that you think of all the time but don't engage in it?
Yeah, I do periodically. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, not awesome, but you know what I mean. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Shane, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this coherent because I didn't take my ADHD meds this morning because it's my day off.
I love it. Okay. That's okay. If it's not coherent, we will also appreciate it.
Well, I want to make sure it's coherent and I like cover everything that like I want to talk about. And I guess like where I'll start, like just an overview, like my self-harm is mostly primarily linked to this negative core belief that I have about myself, that I'm just a defective human, which is a common core belief that people with like CPTSD have.
Yeah.
Just found that out, by the way, because I'm listening to a book about it. So that was pretty interesting to sit with. And it started when I would say it started when I started using substances. So that was about 12 years old. And I was just drinking then. I think I did start cutting at that age as well. And like throughout the years, it's looked a lot different, and I've found that it's kind of transformed in ways that like I didn't expect. For example, sex has been like a way of self-harm. I went through a really intense breakup, and that triggered me to use sex in a very unhealthy way, in a very unsafe way, like just. And you know, it's also looked like reckless driving. It's looked like so many different kinds of drugs. Like, I mean, I don't want to list them all off. I don't want to glorify it, but I mean, it's been a lot of different drugs that I've like, you know, done for like long periods of time throughout my life. You know, I still to this day, like I had an incident where I went in the hospital because I self-harmed in my therapist's appointment. Like in the appointment with my therapist, I hit myself in the head. Yes, in person.
Wow.
Yeah. So my therapist was like, definitely you have to go to the hospital because you just self-harmed in front of me, right? Yeah. I think that kind of covers it.
So it sounds like obviously I think this hospital incident was recently, right? So this is still something that occurs for you, but things like other methods, do you still engage in those on occasion?
So I'm not gonna say that I'm sober. I'm like California sober right now. But I've found that like once I became aware that I was using these methods like in a maladaptive way, I kind of was like, okay, well, this isn't working for me anymore. And then that's when I moved on to another form of self-harm, right? These days, I'm trying not to move on to another form of self-harm, right? But I've found that I do hit myself when I get triggered in a certain way. And it's almost so automatic. Like, it's just, yeah.
Totally. I want to piggyback off of that because to me, I feel that automatic reaction so much that, and it's wild because I cognitively know that self-harm's not going to get me anywhere. It's not actually going to help. It's not going to make me feel better in the long run. But my automatic reaction when things go badly is to want to self-harm. And it's just like kind of wild how addictive it can get, and then trying to change one to the other is so interesting. So I remember, I mean, I've had eating problems my whole life, various food related issues. And I remember distinctly having, when I stopped trying to self-harm, I would binge eat more. And it was so obvious to me, even at like 19, 20, that these things were inherently connected, in that I had one coping mechanism that I was trying to not use. And then I would go to another coping mechanism without thinking about it necessarily. And I think in a lot of ways, eating issues in my life have also been self-harm. In every aspect. Like I have, abused laxatives that I think have screwed up my gut for the rest of my life. I have restricted calories like crazy. I have binge ate like crazy. Like on every spectrum of this world, over exercising until the point of being incredibly injured and having bone spurs in my feet because I refused to stop training, that kind of stuff, right? And I often will notice that those other issues, for lack of a better word, are elevated when I'm not self-harming. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, Shane.
I wanted to also mention, like, because, I wanted to throw in there, I would say, like, reckless spending as well. Almost like a form of self-harm for me.
It sounds like for you, the, like, impulsivity symptoms and the self-harm symptoms are almost, like, it totally connected.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand.
And Shane, I don't know, so I'm in, near Vancouver, Canada, and we have a horrible, horrible, horrible overdose crisis going on. Fentanyl is in everything, and the amount of overdoses is just like awful. And so in a lot of ways, I think substance use in this day and age is even more so. It's playing Russian roulette, honestly. You have no idea what's in the drugs you're taking. And I think there's a lot of self-harm in that respect as well, where people are coming out of these overdoses with like hugely traumatic brain injuries because of using substances as a coping mechanism. And it's devastating as a society that we let any of this happen. And, we're not supporting people to get the treatment that they need when they need it, obviously. But I'm curious, like for you, Shane, is that something that is a factor in substance use where you are? Is it as risky to take any substance?
So my point to that was going to be, I feel like it kind of depends on the substance that you're taking and where you're taking it. I don't really run in the circles. I've really kind of cut a lot of people out of my life that do a lot of harder stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I don't do that anymore. Like, and I just,
right. Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for me to say, but I mean, from what I've seen, I would say it's relatively safe. I see people out at bars and they're using like blow, like no problem.
Right. Yeah.
And where I'm at in Virginia, I'm kind of in a rural area, so I'm not really located in a city.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit different maybe if you go up to DC.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, that's like typically all that's really that I see around is like people are doing weed, maybe some shrooms, cocaine,
right,
drinking.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's so interesting because here it's just like so different. Shannon, do you have anything to add? I know you're not a self-harmer in the classic sense.
Definitely, I have had the impulse for all of these things. Mine generally comes from, it's the image of self, like when I feel ashamed, embarrassed, those types of things. Binge eating, binge drinking has definitely been an issue during different parts. And actually, I think the first time that I heard it might have even been you, Laurie, talk about that in the context of self-harm, I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
But the physical self-harm stuff, while the impulse is there and extremely strong, I've just managed to not do it. I think even in the last episode I talked about
Yeah. Happy for you.
that feeling of like just wanting to smash my head into a wall. And the impulse of it is so strong that I can physically see myself doing it.
Mm.
And I don't know if it's a dissociation thing where I separate from that emotion and then don't carry through with it. So I was just listening to you talk about, you know, the feeling of it becoming addictive, and the impulse has never gone away. So even though I can control the behavior, and it's not a specific skill, I can't name something and say this is why I don't.
It sounds like
It almost sounds like it's like kind of like what came to my mind was compartmentalizing.
Possibly.
But when you talk about the like kind of repetitive aspect of it, you know, yeah, it does kind of become like a coping skill.
Yeah,
it's like
and
even if you are just imagine, it's like a little bit of escapism that you get.
It is, and I would say the same with suicidal ideation. Like for somebody who has had serious non-fatal suicide attempts but has not self-harmed, it's almost like the thought of it is an option, and I would put that in parallel. And I know that that self-harm and suicide are completely separate things,
but sometimes I don't know if they are. Like I think it's more complicated than that, but continue.
Yeah So the thought of being able to do it sometimes is enough. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think that is like the escapism that Shane was just talking about. Sorry, Kat, go ahead.
I forget exactly which book it was, but it's called something like Borderline Guide or something. It's really kind of, this is the first book I read about borderline personality disorder, and it had in there some research they did around how addictive self-harm can be, and how, like, I think the population they were looking at was people who had self-harm daily for a period of time. And those people, when you do a brain scan, so like have that nervous system release afterwards, but they also have that if they think about it, because their nervous system is so used to going through that process. And that I found really interesting, because I have put it off for long periods by doing similar to what I think Shannon is talking about.
Interesting.
Like almost like planning, which does kind of mirror how my ideation sometimes appears also.
That's fascinating.
I just wanted to say, I feel like to go back to talking about like the potential kind of connection between suicidal ideation or, you know, and self-harm. How did I want to say it? Like when I'm experiencing suicidal ideation, my self-harm is present. But if my self-harm is present, doesn't mean my suicidal ideation is also present.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. That was going to be my next question, is how do we distinguish these things for each other or in our own lives? So Shane, is there anything else on that question of how is self-harm and suicide either connected or different for you, other than that you just said, that you want to share before I move on?
I would say the more prolonged I stay in like a self-harming kind of state, the more likely I am going to become suicidal, or like it's going to trigger my, you know, and yeah.
That's like a very interesting, like, what came first situation.
Yeah.
Right? Are you self-harming because at the deep down you're suicidal anyways, or are you becoming suicidal because you're self-harming? Do you know which of those it is?
don't think I have to repeat the question. Repeat it one more time.
Yeah. What I think is interesting about what you said is that you don't know. It's hard to decide whether or not you're self-harming because deep down you're suicidal, but you didn't know yet, and therefore you become suicidal later on, or if you're self-harming then leads you to be suicidal. Do you know which one of those it is?
I think so. Like I said, when I first shared my self-harm, I self-harm because I think that there's something inherently wrong with me, that like I shouldn't be allowed to exist. I get suicidal when I feel like there's no way out of that.
Yes, that makes sense. I feel
Yeah.
the same way about suicide at this point. There's no other way out. And for me, actually, the suicide thoughts are often, not always, often these days actually related to chronic pain as opposed to mental health, because the mental health stuff I've got a decent control over. I mean, maybe I don't if I'm thinking about suicide, but it feels like I have a pretty good control over it. But the chronic pain, you're just like, what?
Pain,
I can't fucking live like this. I cannot continue like this. This is not possible to continue. So, yeah. Anyways, Kat, over to you.
So it's a really interesting question. I definitely self-harmed before I was suicidal, because I remember the first time I was suicidal. And for me, self-harm is two things. It's one of very few things that will make the flashback stop for a little while.
Mm.
And it's also, this is kind of the difference for me, because self-harm for me is about being alive. It's about something tangible that shows that I'm alive and my pain is real and I matter.
Mm.
Whereas my suicidality is about those feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. And both are pretty much ever present, but are different. And they'll peak at different times. So if there's a lot of hopelessness or chronic pain or like chronic fatigue around, then I'll be more likely to become more intensely suicidal. And then I think we touched on it in the suicidality episode, but like that has an impulsivity flavor and a planning flavor. And I think actually, now I think about it, self-harm is the same. Like sometimes I'll be totally overwhelmed and it'll happen with very little thought. And sometimes, like we were just talking about, it's something I will think about for ages. And I remember being at uni and spending weeks, like for most of the day, thinking like, oh, we're not going to self-harm now because it's not bad enough to do. Like we don't feel bad enough to do what we want to do. Like we're not allowed to do that until there's a reason.
Right.
And that kind of prevented that action for a while. I probably couldn't even unpick why I didn't want to at that point in time. Like, I mean, more recently, it's something I've decided to actively attempt to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I would have thought about it like that then.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, your suicidality is about hopelessness and like ending things, right? And inevitable like death, essentially. But your self-harm is more about reminders that you're alive in some ways. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
And connection to your body. So then do those ever, to me, when I think about that, it's like those would never happen co-occurring because they're two opposites. Is that?
I think it's because mostly I can maintain both hope and hopelessness. Otherwise, shit. I would not be here.
Fascinating.
And the times when I've nearly not been here is when that balance changes.
Oh, fuck. That's crazy. Okay. Not crazy. You know what I mean? That's just like a very interesting thought. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's honestly like kind of profound.
Listening to Kat just made me think about the fact that I don't think I've had the urge to physically self-harm since I've had my borderline diagnosis, which, so 5 years, I didn't put that in when I introduced myself. So I can't remember in the last 5 years that desire to physically harm myself. And prior to that, a lot of my anxiety was caused by, and I had big anxiety attacks, like end up in hospital. They thought, ambulance people thought I was having heart attacks. Like it was really pervasive, my anxiety. Also, since my BPD diagnosis, I haven't been hospitalised for an anxiety attack.
Because you know what's happening.
Because I understand what's happening.
Do you think that's related to more self-acceptance?
I think possibly, but I think I now have the ability to understand what's happening inside of my body. And when those really big, ferocious emotional swings occur, and this is when the desire to self-harm would come for me. But I think because I didn't understand what I was experiencing and that I had all of this intense pain on the inside, what I wanted was to be able to see that pain. And I think maybe it might have helped me understand. And so that thought of cutting or slamming my head against a wall, or, all of the different ways that it came, I think for me it was that desire to try and be able to physically see or feel on the outside what was happening on the inside. I don't know if that is the same, and I feel really unqualified to be, contributing to this conversation.
No.
But I just thought it was really interesting that I haven't had that urge since understanding what's happening on the inside.
That's a good point, because I think part of my more spontaneous self-harm often is that kind of feeling of that level of unbearableness isn't going to stop.
I also think, Shannon, that there's something to be said for physical pain that you can see being so much more accepted as valid than emotional pain. And so being able to be like, look, I'm hurting, as opposed to, look, I'm hurting, is...
And the transfer of
unique.
it too, I think, feels like in some way I felt like if it was on the outside, it might make it less on the inside.
Which I think sometimes it does. I hate to say it. I think sometimes it actually does give your brain and body something else to think about. And I think, like Kat said, in those whatever scans, like brain scans they were doing, it does give you that rush that can help temporarily distract from the emotional pain. Keyword temporarily. and also key summary is it's not worth the long-term struggle of what you have to deal with when you're trying to come out of the self-harm. Like, you can self-harm and you might feel better immediately, but in an hour you're going to feel worse, or in 3 hours, or whatever it is. I'm just thinking about if I were to answer that question around, are self-harm and suicide the same or different for me? I think when I first started self-harming, I was probably in my teens, and I think I thought that it was suicide attempts. I thought that I was trying to die, but there's no fucking way I was going to die. They were superficial injuries. Like, there's no way. And so I think I didn't quite grasp that they were different until I aged and realized that what I was doing, there was no way that was ever going to be fatal. And then I started using it as more of a coping mechanism as opposed to a suicide attempt. Does that make sense? Because the methods, I mean, there's a reason that people who use more lethal methods, which are often men, die by suicide way more than women do, but women have way more attempts because we do things like cutting and pills and all these things that don't actually often work. And obviously it's not all gendered, but there is a big component of the methods we choose impacting the outcome in a significant way. So I mean, for me, like cutting is my main thing. But I've also done a lot of like banging on things and I think it's actually fucked up. I think part of my chronic pain comes from my own stupid decisions, which is really annoying. And I mean, I'll live with scars forever, and that's fine by me at this point. There was a point where I was really like self-conscious about them, and now I'm just like, you know what? It is what it is, and this is a sign of how far I've come. But I have had very long periods of time since DBT where I haven't self-harmed, like 4 or 5 years at a time, which is awesome. The annoying part is that the temptation really never goes away. It's the ability to pause and go, this is not worth the outcome. Let's try something different. That is where DBT has really made a difference. But I think that I will forever automatically jump to self-harm and suicide, or both, when something horrible happens. I just think that's how my body is wired, or my brain is wired. Shane.
Yeah, Lori, you kind of bring up a good point. Something that really like resonated with me. Honestly, it's kind of hitting me like a truck.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You talk about living with the scars. I don't know. I often think about like what scars I have, because I don't just have like actual physical scars. Like, talk about the trauma that comes with like years of drug abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's heavy to sit with.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done so many things that like I'm not proud of because of my self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
Things that like I'm gonna live with for the rest of my life, and I don't wish that on anybody. So if you're listening to this episode, like, please do something to stop your self-harm. Don't let yourself keep doing it. Talk to people, because like I think I spent so many years in isolation struggling with this.
Thanks, Shane. Those are really important messages to get across. And I think we've, in some ways, whether it's self-harm or for me it's violence and anger, which, aren't good either. We have those things that we do live with forever. And it fucking sucks.
Yeah.
You can't turn back time. Kat, what were you going to say?
I think, and especially after that, I think I was really lucky that I found a self-harm forum in my teens and stayed there in my 20s. And it was affirming and validating. And we didn't share methods, but like there was a crisis room, and mostly at least 10 of us were in crisis every day. And if you didn't feel up to going in there and talking about it, you didn't, but a lot of the time you did. And it was just a space where I could be honest and where I felt that I mattered and I felt understood. And the value of that is just massive. Like I still have a little like handmade somebody on there. I'll age myself. We had emoticons that were designed by one of the people on the forum, and some of them were hilarious. Like we had one where you like hitting yourself with a frying pan. For like when people were being annoying.
I need that one in my life.
Yeah.
Exactly. I miss a lot of those emoticons, but one of them was a little trigger monster, and like you put a little trigger monster at the beginning if you were going to be talking about stuff that people might not want to read about. And I still have this little handmade trigger monster in my crisis kit now that goes everywhere with me. And like, I'm in different self-harm peer support groups now, and it's called Battle Scars. It's online. Anyone can join. But yeah, just like, I've been alone, but also not alone with it. Like, there's like maybe 2 people that I know in real life. But yeah, just that space where everyone cared about each other.
I'm really glad you had that, Kat, because I'm also always hesitant about those online communities around these topics that aren't like heavily, like not heavily moderated, but like facilitated in some way. Because I know that there's a lot of like pro anorexia forums.
There are
and stuff
pro
like that.
self-harm groups too.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm always so hesitant about like recommending those to people. So it's nice that you have one that's I trust your judgment. You know what I mean? That this is not a place where
that's also one where it's like
how
you
to
can talk about feelings, but you can't talk about methods and stuff.
Yeah, which is important, right? Like, I mean, and I'm not one to I'm not one to over censor things. Usually, if anything, I should probably fucking censor my shit more than I do. But anyway, here we are. But I know, as a person who self harms and is thinking about it on a somewhat regular basis, that I get easily triggered by things. Like, even watching movies and stuff, I have a hard time when somebody's cutting, because it gets to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Same.
So I usually just look away because it's easier than not looking at it. But Shannon, did you have your hand up?
Did, but after Kat went into that, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to wreck that. That was a really lovely message. But I just, after Shane sharing, it made me think about the times during excessive alcohol consumption where it wasn't just my own behavior that I was ashamed of. It was the things that happened to me. And it's because of that self-harm. And at that time, I was drinking specifically to escape. It put me in a situation where the trauma I was trying to escape from reoccurred. So
yeah,
I wanted to add that to Shane's warning of how dangerous it can be in those situations. And it sometimes you can increase the trauma by trying to escape it. So do what Kat said.
Yeah. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to like add on to that like real quick. I mean, like, statistically speaking, like, this is going to get real dark. Statistically speaking, like,
we're doing an episode about self-harm, so it's going to be dark. What are you going to do? Fair. But sorry, go ahead.
Statistically speaking, like, I should be dead or in jail with the shit that I've done, you know? So, like, very fortunate to have come out of it. God, as you can see, this is making me really emotional to speak about it, because quite honestly, like, I have not really divulged the extent of my self-harm. I mean, just even barely to my therapist. So, like, that's the level of isolation I've been, like, keeping myself, like, in around this. So I have to take some of my own advice still.
But that's why these conversations are so important, because it is such a thing with imposed shame. I don't want to say it's a shameful thing, because I actually don't think it's a shameful thing. I think it's a thing that society has imposed a shitload of shame on. And at the end of the day, nobody is doing this for, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. There's always somebody. But this is not something to be ashamed of. It's a coping mechanism that isn't necessarily the best option, but you're doing what you can. But like, if we all had the ability to use a different coping mechanism that wouldn't leave scars and wouldn't potentially risk us going to jail or cause more trauma or whatever these things are that we do, we wouldn't do that. That's not what anybody wants to do. And so hiding the reality that self-harm happens and that it's actually a relatively common experience that people have done at least once. And that's only really if you're talking about things like, cutting, burning, the kind of usual methods. If you talk about getting so drunk that you have unsafe sex that then it leads to a problem, or you use substances that you shouldn't have, or blah, 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 like then it would probably be almost every human being on earth has done those things. And the difference is we are so deeply struggling with the intensity of our emotions that we're just desperate to find a way to distract or end the pain. And who can blame us for that, honestly? I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of.
No.
Go off, Queen.
Yeah. I mean, I've probably told this story before, but I just need to say it in this episode at some point, and this seems like maybe a good spot. So like I said, I've had some pretty decent, like long-standing periods without self-harming. And I had done a really great time of not self-harming. And then like a year or 2 years at the time, that was like the longest I'd ever gone. And then I did it. And I felt like a piece of shit. I was like, wow, look at you. You failed. You had gone so long, blah, blah, blah. And I was beating myself up so hard. And I was in university at the time doing an undergrad in psychology. And I went to class that day, despite obviously not being in my best headspace, but I'm also not one to miss class. And for some weird reason, like some sort of fate, the teacher decided that was the day she was going to talk about the difference between lapse and relapse. And it was exactly what I needed to hear that day. And I will never forget it, because she said, there's addictive behaviors that people go through, or whether it be substance use or other behaviors that people are going through that they might have a period of sobriety from. And sometimes, and I think the AA 12-step model doesn't help with this because it's very much black or white. You go from, I've been sober for 6 months, to, oh my God, I had half a drink. Now I'm no longer sober, and now I go back to zero. And it's so easy to think that way because I think so many of us do. But she was saying that a lapse is like a one-off. It's a blip. It's this tiny little thing that happened and you're like, oh shit, whoops. And then you can continue on with that quote unquote sobriety. Whereas a relapse is a return to your previous behavior state. So self-harming all the time, drinking all the time, using drugs all the time, versus, oh, I had one moment of just like a little blip in the journey, and that's totally normal. And for some reason that day when she said the difference between lapse and relapse, I had been beating myself up all day about how I had gone back to zero and how dare I fail again, blah, blah, blah. What's the point? And then, of course, our black and white thinking comes into play. And we go, oh, well, if I already failed, I may as well keep failing, because what's the point? If I'm at 0 days again, I may as well continue. Anyways, I don't even know what teacher that was. I don't know what class that was, but that moment is so important in my life because I needed to hear it in that exact time that I needed to hear it. So just wanted to hopefully, maybe somebody else is out there and they, had a drink last night and they're beating themselves up over it. And just know that you can continue on with your journey. You have not relapsed. It's just a tiny blip in the story. So what I want to talk about now is harm reduction, I think, is how I want to frame this, as opposed to prevention, for almost that exact reason. Right? Is I don't know if prevention is necessarily the ultimate goal forever. So how do you guys keep yourselves safer or safe from self-harm? And does it work? What does it look like? I can start if that helps. I don't buy the tool that I used to self-harm with. I don't keep them in. I think that there are, like, I think Aaron has one or two of them in his toolkit, but I don't go in there because that's stressful for me anyways. But I don't keep those around. If I have those or I have the urge to buy one, that is a huge red flag. And I have to be able to communicate that. I'm not going to say what it is, but anyways, it's a thing that you can buy anywhere. And I know that that is my number one go-to tool. And I'm very hesitant to ever use them I do not buy them. And Aaron has some, but they are hidden away. And that's such an easy way to keep me from being slightly less triggered. I can self-harm with all sorts of things. I mean, the thing that people I find always so funny about preventing self-harm in like a variety of settings is they're like, take the knives away. I'm like, girl, if I really want to self-harm, I have broken everything in my home to find a way to self-harm. Like you're not gonna prevent self-harm forever by putting me in a padded room, but I can do the things like if I know that this particular thing is going to make me think about self-harming, I don't need that particular thing in my life. And then obviously just generally using the DBT skills to pause, emotionally regulate, use the tip skill. Like there's all those basic things, but that to me that's my harm reduction technique, is just don't have it. How about you, Kat?
I think for me, it's very linked to safety. So I do have what I use everywhere. And that, in a similar way to suicidal ideation, means that I feel safer because I know that option is there.
And so are you keeping these items with you on purpose for that reason, or is it a household item that everybody would have all around them all the time?
On purpose.
Okay, cool.
I have in the past got rid of all of them, but that felt too unsafe, and just made the thinking about it more intense. But saying that, self-harm is way down the list on my safety plan. I have a commitment that I will enact all of those things before I go to self-harm.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. I love that it is on your safety plan, because sometimes that's what you need. You're not saying never do this ever again. It's because that's not necessarily feasible for you, sounds like.
And I think I'm quite lucky that my therapist is also quite non-carceral in that. In that she's very openly sort of said, like, if I want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But it's a symptom of how I'm feeling. So it's not something that we need to focus on as a problem in itself, because if I feel better, then I won't be doing that. Totally. And just holding it. I was going to say unshameful. That's Carolyn Spring's word. But just holding that unshame of the whole of me and all of that is Beautiful. Helpful.
I'm glad you have that counselor in your life who's not automatically like, what do you mean you self-harmed? Because I think that's so common, is parents and partners. Like, I mean, everybody that does not have this experience, sometimes they go, oh my God, they self-harmed. It's the end of the world. They're going to kill themselves, blah, blah, blah. And that's
I didn't tell other
not
people.
The case.
Yeah. I didn't tell other people for so long because the first person who noticed laughed at me and called it pathetic. As in how much I'd done, not that I was doing it.
Right,
kind of
yes.
both,
and
I
think a lot of people have experienced that try harder. Wow, is that all you did? Experience, which is fucked. But yeah. Well, thank you, Kat. I really love that. I love that you have a counselor that can support in that way. Shannon, go ahead.
I wonder how many people have avoided fatal suicide attempts because they have had self-harm in their toolbox. That really just stood out to me, given that you talked about the stigma around it. And I wonder how often this has been used as a successful prevention technique. And would the world view it differently if they understood that?
Hundreds of times, and that's just me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's
exactly.
a great point, Shannon. I wonder if there's research on that. I'm trying to think what the method would be to actually do that research, but that is a really great point, Shannon. Is there anything, I know, Shannon, you came into this being like, I don't really experience this, and now you've kind of realized there are other things in your life that you do experience. Is there anything you want to say on the prevention or the harm reduction piece?
I'm a massive user of the tip skill, like the mammalian dive reflex aspect for resetting my nervous system, and it works really, really well for me. And it made me wonder earlier when we were talking about this, because I was thinking about how am I going to talk about tools or techniques, because I didn't have tools. Like when that urge was a big thing for me, I didn't have tools. I knew nothing about this. But I do use that mammalian dive reflex thing a lot now. And it would be the most successful thing when I am in intense emotional pain or distress. But it did make me wonder about the capacity for physical self-harm and nervous system reset. Like when you understand the science around the mammalian dive reflex, like your body literally thinks you are drowning, so it does all of these things.
It's very similar.
Yeah, so is that when someone self-harms, is the neurological reaction similar to that thing that works really well for me, that people would say, oh yeah, that's super healthy, you know? It's not a maladaptive coping mechanism to throw your face in a bucket of ice water. But if it causes the same thing, like I'm so mindful of the fact that, like, I feel like I might be supporting it, or somebody listening might be thinking, oh, well, it's okay. You know, if she says it does the same thing, cool. That's maybe what I should use. I'm definitely not trying to say that.
And I think that's the hard part about this conversation, no matter where and when it happens, is that there is some value of self-harm in certain circumstances when you have no other skills. And I also think that that's almost why nobody talks about it, because when you talk about it as a coping mechanism, it can totally come across as, yes, it's a thing that we're encouraging. We're not encouraging self-harm. None of us are encouraging that. We all have skills that are way healthier and easier and more effective than self-harm that don't leave lasting injury. But if we pretend that it's all negative, then we're lying to ourselves and others. And then that's where we all sit and hide in shame.
Yeah. So that's really the only thing that I can give my perspective on. Like that tool works so well for me and gives me the same response that I think if I followed through on the impulses that I had, I think that's what I was searching for. So that's really the only perspective I can give on it.
Tip is number one on the safety plan. So I would agree with that as being going for the same effect.
Yeah, and me too, in terms of holding on to ice cubes being a huge one for me, because it's super distracting. And you're using your hands for something that is not self-harming.
I have the little ice packs and you can squeeze them as well.
I know, I need to get those. You guys every super feeler's like, those baby ice packs. And I've bought them for like silent auctions where I'm like putting like a super feeler basket together. I buy them and I'm like, they're so cute. And then I never buy myself any. I don't know why, because they're like $4. I should just buy myself some, but they're adorable.
Treat yourself.
I know, right? I know.
Can we acknowledge the fact that holding ice really friggin' hurts too?
It sucks.
It's not a comfortable thing.
No. And it's messy.
Yeah.
You just get,
I don't ever hold ice, but I love sticking my face in a bowl of ice water. Like, it's my favorite.
Right?
I love it.
That's my go-to as well. I put it in a Snaplock bag with ice and water and then hold my head over. So it's like I'm falling into water and hold my breath at the same time. And
I'll
it
put the ice
really
cubes on my
friggin'
face.
works.
I can't do the whole
Yeah.
day. Anything that's like not being able to breathe is not
Super stressful.
So I'll
And
put the ice cube pack on my face instead.
It's funny, Kat, because I'm completely claustrophobic and cannot breathing is a big thing. Like I even really struggle in summer when there's no breeze because I feel like I'm choking. Yet in this instance, I don't think about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I have an issue with the dentist for that reason. When they have shit and you can't breathe.
Same.
Yeah. Fuck, man. That's like my...
It's why I don't go.
Yeah, that's fair. I do go.
I'm like, I will cry. It is because of this. I will have headphones. Stop if I ask you to, but get on with it. Pretty much.
Oh, my poor dentist is so patient with me. It's very cute. I'm like a literal child at the dentist. Shane, what about you in terms of, harm reduction, prevention, whatever you want to say?
I'm going to reiterate, I guess, kind of what I said earlier about, I would say, like, reach out to a loved one. Even if you can't express to them that, you want to self-harm in the moment, like, just go be around someone that cares about you. And if you can, find a person that you can talk to about it, a person who's not going to judge you about it, who's not going to freak out, who's just going to listen.
And for those of you who are listening who are not people who self-harm, who are partners, who are parents, who are teachers, I think to end this off with Shane just saying, we all need people to talk to that won't freak out. Self-harm is not a thing that you need to panic about most of the time. If it requires medical attention, like stitches and that kind of thing, then yes, bring them to medical attention to deal with the wound. But the more you panic and freak out, the less the people are going to be willing to tell you what's going on.
The more shame it's going to create, the more just negative response it's going to...
Everything. Yeah. It's just going to dive it further and further into the ground, and then you're never going to know.
There's a really beautiful example, if anyone wants or needs one. There's an Instagram account because she's called Lesbi Mum.
Okay.
And she does videos, and it's like as if she's the mother and it's to the camera. And she has one that's like, can you do a reaction of if your child says they've just self-harmed? And it's just the most beautiful thing. Like, I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And like, it's just the comments are just full of everyone saying like, this is what I've never had. And this is amazing. And it's just so healing.
If you see that again, can you send it to our group chat? Because I would absolutely love to see that.
She's done one for loads of different situations. And it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Okay. I think we can end it here. The one thing we didn't talk about is this whole concept of like they're self-harming for attention, but I almost don't even want to give that airtime right now. So I think we can just leave it.
I think if you're self-harming, you need attention.
I agree. If you're self-harming, then and you think it's for attention, then give them attention. Maybe that's the end of that statement.
Yeah.
I hid it. Like the last thing I wanted.
Yeah, it's the other way around. Because how often have I said, "Oh, a cat scratched me"? Yeah. So maybe let's just leave it there. If you think somebody's self-harming for attention, they're probably not. But if they are, then give them attention, because if that's what they need, that's what they're not doing that for fun. And we'll just leave it at that. Shane. Yeah. Boom. Fuck off. Thank you so much for listening to the Superfeeler podcast. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you'd like to learn more about the Superfeeler podcast, share your story, or participate in the Superfeelers Club, which is our peer support group, it's totally free, virtual, and open to anyone who experiences intense emotions or has borderline personality disorder, please check out the link in our show notes or go to laurieedmondson.com. If you would like to support the show, we would very much appreciate it. There's an option to do monthly small donations at whatever denomination you'd like, and you get bonus content, extra resources, and extra connection to me throughout. That can be found on patreon.com/superfeeler, or again in the notes below. Thanks again, and have a great day.